every other country in which the United States has a military mission present in country. When we give them money, there is not one in Israel. The Israelis decide how to spend that money any way they want with no controls of any kind whatsoever, which is not necessarily in our interests. Think about this. Mr. Abneri said repetitively what America should do is set the rules and set the standards and set the... And at the beginning of this session, Mr. Byrd referred to the client-state relationship. We are the clients. Let us decide now to understand that Israel tells us what to do, not the other way around. Think about this. A democracy works on the basis of lobbies. A lobby can be an individual who casts a vote for somebody, or there can be lobbies organized around any political, economic, social, cultural, religious issue that you wish, and that's how a democracy functions, because we are supposed to tell the leaders what it is we want. I appeared on a television program not too long ago in which we were, this is some years ago, thinking back, in which one of the people in the audience, I do not like television shows with audiences because then you play for the applause and the support. But this fellow jumped up and he said, Mr. Peck, do you realize that you are criticizing the President of the United States? I said, yes, but I'd like you to rethink about what you called him. He's not a king. He's a president. He works for me. I don't work for him. I tell him what to do, not the other way around. We are told by the lobby what to do. I have no problem with lobbies. Lobbies is how democracy works, but there's one problem with the pro-Israel lobby which distresses me enormously, and that is they don't allow anybody else to talk. There was a man, perhaps known to some of the people in this room, is Joseph Goebbels in Nazi Germany, who said, and I quote, once you have silenced the opposition, you have won. And we've been silenced. We are not allowed to criticize Israel. You're instantly an anti-Semite if you do so. And in some of the discussions that I've had with people from the other side of this issue, I said that Israeli-Palestinian is an anti-Semite. So is the Haaretz newspaper. In Israel, you are allowed to criticize Israeli government policies. As you know, if you Google Israeli newspapers, even the Jerusalem Post, which is not staffed by a bunch of fuzzy puppies, has criticized some of the things that Israel has done, but you cannot do it here without provoking a firestorm of rabid, nasty folks who accuse you of virtually everything except pederasty, I think. They didn't put that in there. When we were in the Middle East in November with the program, the CNI, political pilgrimage in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in Israel, all of the people, not the leaders, they know better, all of the people were expecting Mr. Obama in the first 24 hours of his presidency to resolve all of the problems facing the world, with the possible exception of male pattern baldness, which would be left to the second day. Now, anyone who expected that, of course, wasn't thinking. But some of us who consider ourselves to be realists, I, by the way, am a chartered public skeptic. A very useful trait to bring to the table when you're talking about the Middle East, because skeptics are very seldom disappointed. It was fairly clear to me that Mr. Obama would have some difficulty in changing the course that America has followed in the Middle East for all of the reasons that other people have mentioned. The American public knows nothing about the Middle East. Because they know nothing, they're not very interested, and because they're not very interested, they don't know much because nobody is going to tell them. Those of us who are a little older, when you go through the checkout lines at the markets, and there's all the magazines lined up, it turns out that Gladys and Steve have broken up. Who? All of those magazines on celebrities, that's what America's interested in. We gotta know what Britney Spears is up to. That's the headline, or down to, I guess, in some cases. We don't want to read about what's going on in the Middle East. Mr. El-Mary and others referred several times to the war in Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't a war. There were not two armies fighting there. There was a huge, powerful army, armed, financed, and equipped by us, kicking the crap, that's a French word, C-R-A-P-P-E, kicking the crap out of the helpless, defenseless people who had nothing to fight back with. That was not a war, but we keep using that word war, which fogs people's minds, because when you think of a war, you think of the two armies rolling forward over the battlefield. You merely had an assault by heavily armed guards on helpless prisoners in the world's largest outdoor jail. We often talk, forgive me, we often talk about negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Think. The prisoners don't negotiate with the guards. That negotiation is a word which thoroughly confuses people who are neither very well informed nor very interested. It is not a negotiation. When we met in Ramallah with the negotiation support staff for the Palestinians, this is young people from many countries who have international law degrees, who work with the Palestinian negotiating team to advance their interests in Gaza and the West Bank. And I took two of the people aside individually, and I said, look, when I talk to people, I say, you cannot talk about negotiations between the occupied and the occupier. Because when you talk about negotiations, it's this way, right? No, it's that way. So I asked them, in so many words, do you negotiate? And to summarize the reply of the young woman and the young man, they said, we beg. We beg. Can we do this? Would you allow us to do that? That is not a negotiation. Please do not ever talk about Israeli-Palestinian peace. There's not a war going on there. It's an occupation. And if you want peace, Israel, you're going to have to end the occupation, which they show very little inclination to do, despite the enormous pressure that America puts on them to do that. We beg as well. The relationship is skewed. The policy, which is very strong, pardon me, I need to say that. The lobby, which is incredibly strong, and many of us do not know the depths and the extent of that power unless we're really in that whirlpool of developing relations with Israel, which are dictated by the lobby, and they silence the rest of us from talking out, from speaking up, at the threat of losses. Look, nobody in their right mind should want anything bad to happen to one single Israeli. I realize there are some people who don't have rational minds. By the same token, nobody in their right mind should want anything bad to happen to one single Palestinian. But above all, in my view, nobody should want a bad thing to happen to one single American. But bad things have happened, are happening, and will happen to all three groups because of Israel's policies in the region and the fact that the United States is correctly perceived as being supportive of all the things Israel does. If you saw in the Washington Post the very brief reference to the fact that the Israelis may have bombed a convoy in the Sudan. The Sudan? No. And the Sudanese said it was the Americans who did it. We saw the airplanes. They are American airplanes. They're the ones that bombed Gaza and Lebanon and Baghdad and Syria and maybe Iran. Now, anyone who thinks that that doesn't cost us is not thinking, because of course it does. If there is in this country of ours women's groups deeply, vitally, actively concerned about the status of women in a country with which they do not have any racial, religious, No relationship at all, except they share the female chromosomes.